record on this computer. And are we recording? Yes, we are. Okay, so and by the same token, warm, bright colors, when they are fairly strongly expressed, are going to advance towards the viewer. And so that's how we create the idea of plastic color, which is the other thing that we're kind of investigating in this project, is to try to get neutralized colors established in places where we want shadows or we want the background to tend to recede into space. And we're going to want to get our warm and bright colors in places where we want that to advance towards the viewer. And so if we have areas of the composition that are tending to recede away from the viewer and areas of the composition that are tending to pop or advance towards the viewer, that opens up the idea of plastic color, and it creates the illusion of three-dimensional shapes on this one-dimensional surface. And we're trying to do this just with pure color dots and the application of pure color dots with the back of the paintbrush. You know, I've got my paintbrush like this, and these are the bristles up here, and I'm using the butt end of the paintbrush to do the application of the dots, so that when I start over again with this, and sometimes this little bit of gray that gets printed in here is kind of a help, because that's a little bit of a cue or a clue that this is a shaded area or this is a neutralized area. This is going to be a darker area. And so we're going to fill that in, I think, with a little bit more with our darker stuff. By the way, I had these blank these blanks printed up on cardstock, and they're out on my table again on the west side of Eden Hall, on that 3 by 8 foot table that I have. So there's a stack of these for you to take, and there's a stack of these for you to take too. So you've got detailed instructions on a hard copy of the original painting that you can take as you're going to try to create this painting. I am going to clean off my brush for a minute. I'm going to try to mix up a different color of my tetrad here. I was doing yellow orange, and then I was doing red orange for a while this morning. I'm going to go ahead and get some blue violet going, because BV down here, blue violet, is one of the colors in my thing, which means I'm going to need some violet and some blue. And I'm going to take my blue and my violet and put them on a palette so that I've got them to work with. There's blue, there's violet, and I'm not even going to, separate the puddles this time. I'm going to actually just put the puddles together so that, okay, I just wiped off and rinsed off the paint off this thing. Putting the puddles together so that they're mixing together, but they can kind of not be mixed together too, as I try to get some blue violet kind of going around here. And blue violet is going to be my black. Blue violet is going to do all kinds of stuff for me. So I'm going to use blue violet in the shaded areas of the composition. Let's get this thing out here so you can see that. And how do I set this all up so that you guys can see all of this stuff together? Okay, so I've got the blue violet going, and I'm going to sneak that up into the shot. And then blue violet I am applying into the corners, and it's going to go up in the background, in between my smattering of red dots up there, because I think somehow I'm going to have blue violet up here. And you might see that since my blue and my violet aren't necessarily completely mixed, that I'm getting a little bit of a cheater technique happening in terms of some wet in wet mixing when I put my the back end of my paintbrush in here. So sometimes I get more blue and sometimes I get more violet. And I just, I've done this a number of times now, so I know that I have to, maybe cheat a little bit to try to get just a little bit more color variety in this thing to make the actual painting pop a bit more. So I'm just trying to put a smattering of blue violet. I'm not a smattering, kind of a predominant amount of blue violet in places that are going to be darker or more neutral, because that's going to help me quite a bit in creating the illusion that this space in the background is receding in space away from the viewer. And so this is something that you can kind of do almost, with the radio on or with your music on and not thinking too hard about stuff. I'm also going to come in here into the interapular space here, the space between apples, this intershadow space between apples, and a lot of blue violet for me. My darkest value is going to kind of go in here because I've got lots of shadows in between the apples. And so I've got to, start to work on darkening and kind of knocking that area down so that the apples can pop, because they're going to be right next to that. And with their warm colors and their brighter colors, the apples should tend to be much stronger in the way that they act. The one thing I really like about the dots is that you can't really get strong, hard edges on things unless you try to get strong, hard edges on stuff. So with shadows kind of creep right into the shaded portion of the apple. And so I'm going to be bringing some of my blue violet kind of interspersed up into the shaded portion of the apple on this crescent shaped shadow that most of these apples are going to have. And so the blue violet's going to be down here in the shadows and stuff, but it doesn't respect boundaries. And so it's going to be kind of coming up into the apple itself. Wherever there's a shadow on the apple, like this area of this apple right here is right here. And so I'm going to have to bring some blue violet up in there to get that shadowy brush stroke kind of expressed. And dot, 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 dot. You guys could even be painting along with me on this on your own painting if you wanted to, because I think maybe my demonstration, it has just about run its course in terms of its effectiveness. But if you are enthralled with my demonstration, then so be it. That's a wonderful thing. I'm going to try to bring this right over here and try to keep working on getting as much of this blue violet off of this puddle and onto this shadow before it dries up, hardens up, and I'm not able to paint with the blue violet anymore. And of course, I have to just check and see what's going on in the actual painting itself, which is kind of hard for you guys to see, but there's an even deeper shadow behind this apple right here, and then not quite so deep shadows with a little bit of reflected light kind of coming off of this apple into this area. So we're going to try to, keep some of that in mind as we notice things about the painting when we spend some time with it, like the reflected light. Where are the deepest shadows? And where are the shadows not quite so deep, and what's going on? And this is one of those shadows that is so dark and strong that the computer didn't even indicate this as a low key area when it created all of these shapes. The computer looked at this cast shadow right here and decided it was another shape, and it couldn't quite figure out what it was. So it just made kind of a contour line around it and didn't fill it in, when it is obviously darker than all of the other negative spaces and shadows in this composition. And so we're going to have a pretty deep dark shadow cast behind this particular apple right here on the end, but it's probably going to be murky, and so its edges will maybe dissolve into some of the other shadows in this interspatial place between apples in here and that kind of thing. Your dots don't have to be perfect. Your dots don't all have to be the same size. Your dots don't even really have to be dots. But you're probably going to find that there's some loss of efficiency as the puddle of paint becomes diminished or depleted, and so you'll have to add some more paint to it to keep on going. But anyway, that gets you started in terms of this. And I think for the first several hours of painting, we're just trying to fill up the page with dots and just trying to rough out, you know, our yellow oranges, our reds and violets, and our greens. And we're just trying to get things established on here. After the first couple of hours, when we get to this point in the painting, then we're going to be doing some refining and trying to pick out some highlights in the painting, get a smattering and an interspersing of dots on on these shadowed crescent shapes on each piece of the fruit, because each piece of the fruit has a shadow over on the right side of some kind. And so, you know, it's either going to be green on this green apple, these two green apples over here, or it's going to be a reddish kind of a shadow on these 5 red apples over here. Got 2 green apples, got 5 green apples in the composition. And so each apple is slightly different. And that's what makes it so interesting. Yes, there's 7 apples, and that's all there is in the still life, and there's nothing else. And yet each one is a very unique, distinct shape, which has distinct features on it. But they also share common ideas about the highlights in the center of each apple, the crescent-shaped shadow on the right side crescent area of each apple. Each one kind of tends to send out a cast shadow of some kind into the background. And then we've got them sitting in the context of a tabletop. And so that tabletop has a pool of light in front of the apples, and it starts to taper out into shadows and kind of indeterminate neutralized color and space in the background. So it's a relatively simple still life, and yet it presents all kinds of wonderful challenges for us in terms of investigating plastic color to create plastic shapes in a plastic space. The illusion of three-dimensional shapes in space on a two-dimensional surface. That's always been the the allure of painting. And so when we reinterpret this painting using our tetrad, we are trying to explore that kind of thing. That's about all I got for you guys today, except to, get out my whip and crack that whip and try to get you guys going on this. If anybody has a project that you've been painting on right now, and it seems to be going fairly well, you're sure welcome to turn on your microphone and your camera and hold it up, so that we can look at it. I'm happy to have you guys share this stuff. I'm going to come back up to you with my face and do the talking head thing for a second. But are there any questions, comments, concerns about this project? I know you've never painted before, and yet here we are doing a painting. And in the fullness of time, I said this was going to take us about 10 days. So we've got about 5 days left in this project. So in the fullness of time, you're going to get something that's going to look like this and have the illusion of those 7 apples in space and time. Now, a lot of student projects are going to have a different look to them. And like this is one student project that got turned in a couple of years ago. And it's a good idea. We do have a little bit brighter sense of yellow in the foreground, which makes that part of the tabletop kick forward just a little bit. We've got a little bit more of a sense of shadow in the background. It's bluer and more violet in the background, which makes that tend to recede in space a little bit. Our apples, have a sense of something brighter in the center of the apple and a little bit of shadow kind of developed around the edges of the apple. So they sort of do a three-dimensional thing. This one just needed to get developed a little bit more in terms of making sure that the highlights in the left center portion of each apple were well developed, and the shadows in the right crescent area of each apple were kind of well developed. And that this person didn't quite get that, but this was a really good start. This one was really nice, except that they were doing a lot of wet painting, and so a lot of the dots tended to start to become obscured a little bit. When you really look close, you can see the texture of the dots in here. But for the most part, the different color shapes aren't broken up enough with an interspersing and smattering of other colors from the 4 colors of the tetrad. So this is good. I would just like to push this just a little bit more so that it isn't quite, for me, this isn't quite finished yet. But, you know, at the same token, we've got the brightly colored, brighter colored, higher key value in the foreground, making the foreground pop forward. We've got neutralized colors in the background, which makes the background recede a little bit. We've got enough of the highlights and shadows happening in the apples to make them start to pop as 3-dimensional objects in this thing. So it is working. And this one too, this is the beginning to work. You know, we've still got all of those things, the pool of light in the foreground, the neutralized dark area in the background. And again, just starting to get this crescent shaped shadow happening on some of the pieces of fruit makes those two really pop and stand out as 3-dimensional objects. And the more we can develop, you know, both a bright highlight in the middle of the piece of fruit and a crescent shaped shadow over on the right side of each piece of fruit, and have that be kind of a consistent lighting situation for each piece of fruit, then they will start to pop and work for us as apples. So that's what we're going to be trying to work on over the next couple of days. I don't see you guys just jumping in there trying to ask me a bunch of questions or share the early version of your project with me. So I'm gonna probably leave it at this today and just say you got to jump in and you got to start working on this, because you got to just throw, you know, a couple hours worth of work in on this to get someplace so that we even have a something to start talking about. But once you do, I mean, I definitely think there will be 6, 7, or 8 hours worth of work on this. But when you get done with it, it is a project that is worthy of framing. It'll be a really good painting. You will surprise yourself and amaze your friends with this project. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up today. I'm going to hang out to talk with somebody who wants to talk to me off the record and after class. So I'm going to hang out for a while. But otherwise, I'm going to say goodbye for now and see the rest of you guys on Friday. So come over and pick up your stuff if you haven't gotten the worksheets to work with on this, and start painting. And I want to see some paintings underway by Friday. So until then, goodbye for now. I'm not going to hit the end button, but I am going to stop the recording, and I'm going to hang out to talk afterwards on this thing. So goodbye for now. So stop recording.